Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today, the top 10 reasons you're wrong about everything. No matter how thoughtful, intelligent, well-informed, or open-minded you think you are, you're wrong. Even if you are humble enough to admit what you don't know, odds are you are still falling victim to a major cognitive fallacy that keeps you from having an accurate impression of reality. Cognitive fallacies are so common, they are almost synonymous with thinking. And like a chicken and egg puzzle, they make it exhausting to try and think your way out of them. So, whether you want to shatter the illusion of your false humility or can't wait to leave a comment at the bottom of this video explaining how you are actually never wrong about anything, this video should give you plenty to think about in your own fundamentally flawed and biased way. Number 10. Your lizard brain. It turns out size does matter, but mostly because of how you use it, or more precisely, how it can be used. Different areas of the brain have different functions, so it isn't the total size that matters so much as the relative size of different areas which support different cognitive processes. And this isn't an endorsement of phrenology, it is a question of capacity, which may or may not actually be utilized. Human brains are like evolutionary onions. They have developed several layers, and each layer adds both mass and the capacity for higher functions. Because we are all superficial, we tend to heap attention on the last outer layer, the cerebral cortex that is capable of complex thought, reasoning, and many of the features we think of as defining intelligence or humanity. But superficiality is stupid, and we tend to give less credit to the relatively more important, less evolved layers, namely the lizard brain that secretly controls everything. Reptilian conspiracy theorists rejoice. Apparently you were right all along. At the core of all brain activity is a small combination of brain parts found in all vertebrates that serve mostly to help keep you alive. They regulate heart rate, breathing, equilibrium, etc. Surrounding this is the limbic system, also known as the lizard brain, because that's about all there is inside the average lizard's head. It interacts with the central core to process sensory information, generate basic emotions, and manage decision-making at its most rudimentary level. In short, this bit of the brain is where instinct lives. Every unconscious habit or automatic response, jumping when startled, eating what tastes good, or trying to make babies, originates in that reptilian core. Because it is obsessed with survival, eating, escaping, reproducing, the lizard brain has an uncanny ability to shout over your higher reasoning brain and take control, rendering the more evolved lobes, the ones that make you smarter than the average ape, impotent right when it counts. Since it is embarrassing to admit how often our behavior is driven by base animal impulses, we tend to employ the rest of our mammalian brains to justify our behavior rather than control it. This is why rationalization is common to the point of it being unconscious. It takes a lot of mental effort and concentration to perpetually silence the lizard brain, but a lot less to delegate decision-making to it and let the cerebral cortex invent excuses to make those decisions seem rational. Like so many MFA graduates who wind up writing generic marketing copy to pay the rent, our higher functions squander their talents by simply dressing up our primal instincts as deliberate and thoughtful actions. Human evolution has essentially turned us into bullshit artists because it is easier to invent excuses for our behavior than to take active control of it. Number 9. Threat perception. As a species, we like to pat ourselves on the back for being aware of our own mortality. As far as we can tell, no other animals on Earth possess this innate knowledge of their inevitable death, which supposedly gives us a powerful cognitive and behavioral advantage. Except our brains are still hardwired to ignore long-term consequences so that we can better enjoy short-term pleasures. Just as our lizard brains don't let our higher functions waste time trying to reason us out of harm's way, they tend not to let thoughtful consideration for impending disaster get in the way of a good time. The fight-or-flight response is really only applicable in dealing with an immediate threat. When the risk is more long-term, like obesity or the robot apocalypse, the lizard brain becomes obsessed with instant gratification. Outside of the fight-or-flight response, the lizard brain is basically playing a never-ending game of marry or kill. Only it isn't as interested in monogamy as it is in getting fed, so the game actually becomes eat or kill. Even when there isn't an immediate demand for its services, your lizard brain still wants its voice heard and will always drive you to choose short-term pleasure over long-term security. And when pleasure is involved as opposed to fear, it makes your lizard brain feel like it's winning the game and it wants you to keep playing. This is also known as addiction. It literally happens in your brain, and it is not nearly as dependent on the chemical properties of any substances involved as you might think. This is why behaviors can become just as addictive as anything you can consume. That is also why treating addiction takes more than just willpower. You have to physically change your brain to develop new habits. So while you can call upon all your knowledge and all your experiences to make a decision about how to behave in a given situation, you are simultaneously working to suppress your instinct to simply do the easiest, most carnally satisfying thing possible. And now we get to the conclusion, which is basically why things like Netflix, Cheetos, and porn are quite so popular. Number 8. Authority. You know that saying, never meet your heroes? Well, that's because there is a gap between what we expect people to be and what they actually are. Only it isn't just heroes, it's everyone. Pretty, tall, confident, or even just carrying a bloody clipboard. There's a whole cocktail of fallacies at play here, but aside from projecting a false correlation of authority based purely on appearance, there is the timeless appeal to that authority. This can manifest as anything from a meme image that uses a famous historical figure to make a quote sound profound when it is actually nonsense, to using Rotten Tomatoes to determine what is or is not a good movie. It is easy to come up with an opinion, but simply having more of them doesn't make them objective or informed. Even credentialed experts like doctors are often operating more on informed opinions than cut and dry facts, and that's assuming the subject in question is actually within their area of expertise. If a nurse and a doctor disagreed over the best way to deliver a baby, for example, people tend to assume that the doctor is the superior authority on the matter. Of course, if the nurse was a certified nurse midwife, a maternity specialist trained in women's health and pregnancy issues, and the doctor was a colorectal surgeon, that's a butt doctor by the way, then deferring to the doctor certainly seems a little misguided. But the natural inclination we all feel is to simply look for an authority without first qualifying what makes that person an authority in the first place. Number 7. Binary thinking. Sport. The popular narrative holds that youth sports create character, teach leadership, teach cooperation, and all other sorts of valuable life lessons. Now, all of that may be true, but they also train participants and spectators alike to view everything as a tribal contest between good and bad, between right and wrong. I mean, us and them. This is why team sports are so eternally popular. They reflect the way that we think. Even though our brains evolve to tolerate and process complexity, these new developmental expansion drives take extra processing power, so we subconsciously simplify whenever is possible. And it turns out that it's always possible, because there are very few circumstances that can't be fallaciously boiled down to an A-B option, just like opposing sports teams facing off in a competition. This is the essence of binary thinking. A's and B's, ones and zeros, us and them. Surviving as a tribe requires cooperation, which is greatly aided by the perception of a shared threat, a competing tribe, an opposing team, if you will. Because this kind of cooperative competition worldview has been so famously helpful in human survival, we project its simplistic calculus onto damn near everything else, so that we can make better decisions, we can forge alliances, and elect the right candidate for president. No matter how much you holler about how party membership is a representation of ideological cohesion, millions of years of evolution make a compelling counterargument that you actually just picked a team and you want to see them win. Even when it comes to what we eat, we can't tolerate the dietary complexity of the omnivore. Instead, we make wild extrapolations. Low in fat must also mean low in anything else that might kill us. Non-GMO means healthy. Reduced sodium means vitamin-enriched. Our selection process for food is overwhelmed by creative labels that speak directly to our monkey minds, looking for the team that we perceive as healthy. Number 6. The Internet. Believing your opinions are valid and correct is like thinking you know which way is up in an MC Escher drawing. It only works if you limit your focus and deliberately ignore all contradictory evidence. And, well, there's this thing and it's called the internet, and it's a near perfect tool for doing just that. The internet is well on its way to bringing the sum total of human knowledge within reach of anyone who connects to it. We have never had more access to information or more user-friendly platforms for consuming and disseminating data. Following the patterns established by the advent of written script or the printing press, we should be seeing an explosion of intelligence. We should be seeing progress and intellectual transformation. But we aren't. What we are seeing instead is that people are more interested in being right than being informed, in making obnoxious punchline comments than advancing discourse, in rickrolling earnest YouTubers than in providing a video entertainment experience. Rather than an escalator to the pinnacle of human achievement, the internet is really just a utility for feeding confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the human tendency to agree with people who say things that we also think, say things we also feel. This gives us a great surge of confidence. Online, you can find someone arguing for or agreeing with virtually anything. This means no matter how objectively wrong you are, you can find someone else on your side. Now, through the power of binary thinking, which we mentioned before, you can boldly assume infallibility by association. After all, if people agree with you, then the real problem isn't with your ideas, it is with the people who disagree with your ideas. The internet, in combination with social media, feeds a similar but different problem, and that's selection bias. This is where we tend to seek out opinions that match ours and ignore those that don't. The fact that you can block Facebook friends from your feed seems like a feature, but it is really just proof of how the internet is an automated cognitive fallacy. Multiply your friends network by the news channels you watch, the papers you read, the people you talk to, the movies you see, the restaurants you patronize, and the house of worship you attend, and you can see how we aren't really looking for truth, we're just looking to avoid conflict. A possible defense against the overwhelming human tendency to indulge these biases has cropped up in the form of big data, a massive automated algorithmic assessment of raw data through various query-based lenses. President Obama even established the Office of Data Science in an effort to bring some measure of scientific and mathematical objectivity to the direction of US federal policy. Either that, or even the White House is losing ground in the fight against artificial intelligence. Number 5. Distorted memories. Memories are less like images etched into granite and more like soft Play-Doh we accidentally step on and mix together until everything is a gross grey colour. In less metaphorical terms, memories are never complete. As we learn, make new memories, experience new emotions, and find ourselves in new contexts trying to remember something, all this new mental baggage lands directly on the memories we are trying to recall. When we remember something, we aren't simply recalling it like a photo in an album, we are interacting with it, projecting new memories, new knowledge, and biases onto the old memory. Sometimes we construct memories through some combination of suggestion and desire, or perhaps fear. For example, if you are about to go on a date, you might find yourself visualizing disaster scenarios and the date ends in lonely tears. The emotionally jarring imagery might even compel you to picture the disaster over and over again until the repetition emblazons the whole scene on your memory as though it actually happens. Alternatively, you might find the experience of that hot date so sensual that you expedite its storage straight to long-term memory. Unfortunately, you can have efficiency or you can have accuracy, but you can't have both. In order to make memories easier to recall, our brains take shortcuts and then fill in the gaps whenever we call on them. This sort of adaptive memory relies on your present-day intellectual context and capacity to make up for what you didn't actively commit to memory. It's sort of like saving your finished novel as a Word document and then opening it back up, only to find a 900-page Mad Libs epic, except that you didn't even realize that you are filling in random nouns and adjectives to complete the story. It is also highly suggestible, which is why eyewitness testimony is basically worthless. If they are gently nudged towards thinking something, they retroactively convince themselves that that is what they actually saw. Outside of the occasional trauma or joy that is the stuff of dynamic memory, there is the unassuming, everyday drudgery that makes up the bulk of our lives. Like the commute to work or the layout of your home, this is the background scenery that seems so unchanging that our brains actually stop noticing it and just assume it is there, a cognitive function which is known as habituation. our brains are much more engaged by novelty than familiarity, so when stimulation becomes routine, it stops penetrating all the way through to every layer of the brain and starts getting filtered out as simply noise. Number 4. Aging. Getting old is bad for your brain. If you've ever met an old person, you might already be familiar with the telltale signs of cognitive decline: forgetfulness, slower reflexes, impaired judgment, etc. Of course, there is no set age at which one becomes old, and their brains start getting unreliable. Alzheimer's can begin to develop in patients as young as 40, and well, 40 is the new 30, so no one's really immune. But even if you reach your golden years in peak physical fitness, that still means you've spent a lifetime recalling old memories, which, as you'll recall, is not a passive process. By then, your long-term memory will be a mess of reconstruction, adaptation, suggestion, and pure invention that is hardly recognizable as an account of what you actually experienced in your life. And when you start preparing yourself to face the grim spectre of death, you'll likely want to believe that you lived a good life, which means you'll subjectively recall memories through a very thick lens of nostalgia. The future may be uncertain, but you'll always have the good old days to reflect on, because you are probably making them up as a compensatory mechanism for the lack of true and reliable memories. And you'll likely be spending a lot more time wrapped up in your comfort blanket of your imaginary past, because your brain's ability to perceive sensory information is also going to decline as you age. Sugar literally is going to taste less sweet, and all of your favorite foods will become less appetizing. You'll remember everything as tasting better back in the day, because in the current day you aren't really fully capable of experiencing the same simple pleasures of life. Bearing that in mind, maybe the next time the grumpy geezer you run across will seem less like a curmudgeon and more like another example of the quiet tragedy of the human experience. Number 3. Groupthink. If American anti-drug advertising is to be believed, peer pressure's primary function is to get kids to take drugs in a desperate bid to seem cool. It is easily countered by the forceful repetition of no to any offer that involves social conformity. In reality, peer pressure is one of the key evolutionary advantages that helps humans survive and thrive. Adopting a cooperative strategy might allow hunters to take down a mammoth and enjoy more spoils than they would have if they hunted individually. Toddlers learn most of their early lessons, like how to talk or when to laugh, by trying to imitate the people around them. The military indoctrinates soldiers to follow orders and work as a unit, because everyone having their own idea about how to behave in combat is a solid way to get everyone killed. But our tendency to crowdsource our decisions isn't limited to learning and survival tactics. Similar to that appeal to authority we mentioned earlier, groupthink functions as an individual default to the apparent will of the crowd. It isn't just high schoolers who want to be part of the in-crowd, and that's why angry mobs, bandwagons, and the wave are all such standard features of people assembling. It's also why your opinion on a single issue can be extrapolated to an entire political platform. When you find a group who agrees with you, you naturally want to continue agreeing with them. By extension, even when we find ourselves disagreeing with a group, we will self-police that disunity and silence dissent so as not to injure our membership. This, in combination with deference to authority, is how humans are able to come together and produce such hallmark events as a genocide. Much as we celebrate the illusory notions of individuality, this tendency to try to blend in mirror behavior and offload thinking to a group is all but impossible to prevent once enough people start mingling. It is unconsciously activated by socialization, and the only defense goes against instinct and popular opinion, and being unpopular really is for us quite the worst. Number 2. Conditioning. What is free will? That's a trick question. You have no idea, because most of what you perceive as deliberate behavior is actually a conditioned response. From your minor daily habits to your entire sense of identity, you are overwhelmingly the product of conditioning, otherwise known as training. This is the exact same way you get pets and babies to defecate with more precision. If you aren't a pet owner, you've still more than likely heard of the experiments of Pavlov, particularly the part about when the dog began salivating upon hearing the ringing of a bell. Well, culture is to people what ringing bell is to the dog. Except in society, the people holding the bell may not realize what they are doing, so both the trainer and the trainee are participating in the conditioning process unawares. This is basically how superstitions are born. By failing to differentiate between correlation and causation, we find ourselves augmenting behavior purely out of a perceived association with the desired outcome. Plus, memory distortions can actively feed conditioning. We remember certain key features of what appears to be a cause and effect and then link the two. Without reconsidering the basis for that connection, we simply remember it and proceed to act on it as though it is a fact. Whether it starts as an effort to avoid pain, embarrassment, public shaming, loneliness, or the pursuit of pleasure, friends, laughter, comfort, social acceptance, your life soon becomes one long chain of conditioned responses that only seem like choices because of the stories you tell yourself about them. In fact, number 1. It's narrative thinking. Most people think of empathy as the capacity to put oneself in someone else's shoes. If you can imagine what something feels like, that must mean you understand how someone is actually feeling. Right? The key here is that in order to relate to something, you need to see yourself in that person's shoes. Everything we perceive or think about, we convert to a first-person perspective. Our minds are inherently self-centered. This is the essence of narrative thinking. All of existence is a story, and we think that we are the main character. Not only is this the bridge connecting us to our fellow humans, it is one of the primary ways we make decisions, big or small. Intrinsic or even relative value matter much less to us when expressing preference for a particular musician, brand, lifestyle, religion, or hair color. The value they add to our lives starts as the story we tell ourselves about them and how they enrich our own sense of ourselves as the leading player. We tell stories to explain everything. Even our everyday speech is riddled with metaphors, but nothing more so than our own behavior. Narrative thinking is how we persistently ignore the bundle of instinct and emotion regulating our behavior and turn it all into a blend of destiny and deliberation. It is how we take perfectly good memories and sensory perception and muddle them into whatever we want them to be. Our brains even tell stories, subconsciously filling in perceptual gaps to make sense of stimuli otherwise known as illusions. So I really hope you enjoyed that video, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for brand new videos every single day. Also, I've got a podcast. It's called BrainFood, and it's educational, entertaining content just like this. It's a bit longer form, and it goes into a lot more depth on a specific subject, really getting into all of those fascinating little details. You can check it out through the link in the description below, or just by searching your favorite podcast app for BrainFood. And if you like this YouTube channel, you are sure to love that podcast. But if you want to watch something else right now, why not check out a related video from the TopTenz archives over there on the right? And as always, thank you for watching.